So up until now, we haven't done anything as far as making our web page responsive, which of course we're going to want to do. Now, if you don't know what responsive is, let me show you here on Airbnb what I mean by that. So as we have a full screen on Airbnb, you can see we have 4 images or property listings across the page. Now, when we dragged our web page and made it smaller or larger, none of the elements moved. So let's see what happens when we shrink the size of Airbnb's web page. So let's grab this left side and start shrinking, and you can already see the web page changing. You notice the images are becoming smaller, and you can see that nav bar displaying less icons as we get smaller and smaller. Now, watch what happens when we get to a certain point. You can see that it went from 4 to 3. So at a certain pixel width, they've made it a 3-column instead of a 4-column, row. So if we go even smaller, watch what happens. At a certain point, we'll go to 2. So at each of these points, they are basically saying, hey, at such and such pixel width, we want to display 3, and another pixel width will display 2, and so on and so forth until you get to 1. So you can see on the smallest size, we're only displaying 1, and you can scroll down and see all of the listings. If we go all the way out again, you can see that there are 4 at their biggest size. So let's go build our own example of this in Bubbles Editor. So you can see here I have these pre-built pricing cards, and you're commonly going to be met with this as every application has pricing cards because you're going to be charging a price. So let's look at how we can change the responsiveness of this. Because if we go to preview right now and we drag it and make it smaller, none of our elements are changing. So they bleed off the page, and you never want that to happen. So let's go back into Bubbles Editor, and you can see here we have UI Builder selected. Let's select responsive. So now we can see these pixels show up here displaying the width size of our page. Right now it's at 1080 pixels. If we come here and drag, we can see that it live updates the pixel width for us. And we can also select custom or predefined pixel widths. So look what's happening. I mean, you can already tell what's going on here. So if we come to the largest size, we're fine. If we go down, you can see that this group is already bleeding off the page, as well as all of the elements. So nothing happens. You just won't be able to see it. It'll bleed off the page. So what's the first thing we're going to want to do? Well, let's come to the parent element. We'll go to Edit. You can see it's fixed. Now, remember we talked about this earlier. Fixed is not really what you want to use. You want to be using Align to Parent or Row or Column. So let's do Row. Let's center align it. Actually, let's give a space between it. So now they're all separated. Nothing's changed yet. It still bleeds off the page, but we're setting up for what we're going to do next. So next thing we're going to want to do is Edit. And now you can see this Make Element Fixed Width is checked. We don't want it to be fixed width, and you really never want it to be fixed width. You always want it to be dynamic, so it changes with the page. So unclick that, and let's see what happens. So now you can see it still bleeds off the page. However, if it goes to a certain width, it expands with the page. It's okay. It's a little responsive, but not what we want. So let's go back. We'll edit. So you can see we have the min width. So that's why it was not shrinking to what we needed it to, but it was expanding to what we needed to. So this is where I want to bring up percent versus pixel. So far, we've been using pixels to determine all of our element sizing. However, in practice, you want to be using percents as much as possible because it's the most dynamic way to do it. So if we select percent, obviously, it's going to bleed off the page at 1,000%. Let's select 100 as the minimum width. And let's select the max as 100% as well. Now let's see what happens when we do our responsiveness. You can see it automatically already created a column, and the rows then move down to the next row to accommodate for this change in space. So we can see it's already a ton more responsive than we previously had it. So this is awesome. Now there's still a few things we need to change as this is not near perfect. So let's look at a different example. Let's change it from row to align to parent. And now let's look at the responsiveness. Now you see they overlap and even cross-lap once you go negative, which is kind of interesting. But you can see they cross over, and that's not what we want. We want them to stop when they touch each other and probably form a new row. Now when you have row as your parent, then of course it's automatically going to create that new line for you. But say we're not using row for whatever use case we have, and we're using align to parent. Well, what can we do? First thing we want to do is make sure these cards are not taking up a fixed width like they are right now. So you can see it's fixed. Let's change it to align to parent, and that gives us the ability to play with the width and height. Now, while they're fixed width, we can still have them be dynamic. So if we change this to 33%, it will still be dynamic. You can see it changing sizes. However, that pricing card is still bleeding off. So we'll get into that in a second, but let's finish off the other cards and see what we can't make happen here. So let's change this to align to parent, and we'll leave that checked, and we'll go 33%, and we'll do the same thing over here on this. So we'll make it align to parent, and we'll leave that checked, and we'll go 33%. So let's see what happens when we change the size of these. See, they all grow and shrink together, and they don't overlap, and this is exactly what we want. But obviously, you can still see a major problem. The pricing cards are not changing with them. So let's fix that as well. Let's come here, come to Edit. We'll come to Layout. And in this, we want to do a fixed width of 100%. Meaning we want it to take up all the space it can. However, we want it to shrink when the parent component shrinks. So let's change all those. Let's go here to Layout. We'll leave that checked, make it 100%. And we'll do this for the last component as well. Leave that checked. Go to, 100%. Now let's see what happens. Those text boxes have been changed. We can see that the pricing card now stays within the confines of its parent. So great. However, it still looks weird. The pricing card text should not be that large as we shrink in size. So let's fix that. Let's go back, Edit, and we'll go to a conditional. So we've done conditionals in the past, and now we're bringing them up as they're going to be brought up a ton more in the future. So if you are still unfamiliar with conditionals, go back and watch that lesson, refresh your memory, but let's create a new conditional here. So let's define a condition. And now we want to do a if-then statement, but according to what size the page is. So let's do that. Let's come here and select, scroll down and select, where are we? Current page width. And then we want to make that less than or equals to. So if this page is less than or equal to, and we'll come and select a predefined size of the mobile landscape, then we want something to happen. So if it's less than 768 pixels or equal to it, we want a change. And what do we want to change? Well, the text size. So let's change that. Let's go down and find text or font size and change it to 18. And let's see what that looks like. So let's move it. You can see right there, once it hits that 76, I believe 768 or below, we can see that it changes its size. And that's exactly what we want. So you see it's much more responsive than we originally had it. And once you understand the basics of how responsiveness works, you can apply it to any and every component. That's why we don't need to cover it in depth, because once you understand how to do it with one component, really you can do the same thing with every component. But let's go back into our conditional and see what else we have available to us. So we'll come and edit, we'll go back to our conditional. Let's define another condition. So we'll do the page width again. So scroll down, come to the current page width, but let's do a greater than or equal to, and we'll do a 768 pixel. So the mobile landscape. And now we want to change the color of the text. So let's scroll down, find font color, and we want to make it blue, for example. So you can see it already changed blue, but if we go below 768, it goes back to red and shrinks in size. So again, there's a ton you can do with responsiveness, and it's important you play around with this yourself. Pause this lesson, go into Bubble, build out these pricing cards, and play around with sizing and how they move around the page. Once you understand the basics, you can do it with any element that exists. So going forward, when we're building out these web pages and examples, we're going to be using a more responsive approach and using those percents and max and min widths, especially when we get to our capstone project. We're going to be keeping that in mind as we build it. But again, once you understand the basics of how responsiveness works, you can apply it to any component on the page. So just understanding the basics will let you build upon the most complex applications out there. So we'll leave off there and we'll get right into our last lesson for Module 1. You're doing great. Let's finish strong and complete our last lesson and get into Module 2. I'll see you then.